President Obama argues that, quote, the overwhelming majority of Americans think that raising the minimum wage is a good idea, but some worry his proposal would kill American jobs. With others, both parties are just using the issue to play politics, which is interesting because that's what the political insiders are tweeting about tonight. They are here at home base, and you can join in our conversation on Twitter at Political Insiders, at Harris Faulkner, hashtag FRW, so we can get those comments on the air. And to the far end of the table, John LeBoutillier, former Republican congressman for New York, Pat Caddell in the center, a former, I make it sound like you're going to box each other, but you're not, a former pollster for President Jimmy Carter and Fox News contributor, well, you might, and Doug Schoen, former pollster for President Bill Clinton and a Fox News contributor as well. Gentlemen, good to have you all. Good to be here. So it's interesting how divergent your views are on what's happening at this governor's meeting, because jobs are the focus. Pat, you say it's really not.
No, this is electioneering. I mean, look, the problem with the minimum wage issue is complicated. I think voters say it's complicated, which is, yes, it helps people who need boost their income because the economy isn't working. At the same time, yes, it's going to cut jobs. Basically, what the CBO reported, the Congressional Budget Office, reported this week. More importantly, though, what we have is neither party pushing, let's grow the economy, let's have more jobs because and higher incomes because it's growing. It's all politics. The Democrats want to get away from Obamacare, so they're doing minimum wage because it polls well. And the Republicans, I don't know what they're doing. John, you can explain to me.
It's interesting.
No, they're just saying no.
So for people, the main issue is jobs, but for politicians, it's not.
They have their own jobs. They don't care. They're happy with their own situation. The Republicans this week came out with their 2014 agenda, and it did not mention private sector job creation. Not one peep about it. Now, this is what we Republicans believe is the engine of the economy, is the private sector growing to create, to create tax revenue. Yet they don't want to talk about it.
Minimum wage. Let's put it up on the screen so people can see what the president is talking about. And this is for a certain group of federal workers, although he wants to see this feather out across the country. He's hoping that states will pick this up. So currently it's $7.25 an hour. He's proposing $10.10 an hour. Pat, you say it's somewhat of a placebo and that they're just trying not to talk. It's like the not Obamacare topic. Doug?
Well, what Pat was saying was basically correct, as John. Bottom line, CBO says we will lose 500,000 jobs, 900,000 people drawn out of poverty, 16.5 million will see their quality of life improved. But it is not a job creator. We have no strategy to reform the tax code other than Congressman Camp, who's being squashed by his Republican colleagues who wants to propose tax reform. The Democrats have a purely Harris pro-democratic entitlement budget that doesn't seek any common ground and has limited funding for job creation. Bottom line, there isn't a job creation strategy in a country that desperately wants one.
So where is the idea?
Well, the idea is going to come somewhere. It's probably not coming from Washington. It came, I brought this up to you before, 1979. The Republicans are down and out like they sort of are now. And a couple of young congressmen, Jack Kemp and Stockman and a couple other guys came up with the Kemp-Roth tax cut bill. And that thing a year later helped elect Reagan, helped probably revive the economy for a generation. And there's going to have to be something like that, an incentive for private sector business owners to hire people.
And the important point is that these politicians in Washington in both parties have their eyes only on one thing. Their jobs, as you said, how to get reelected. Neither party really wants to propose or cares about what's happening outside the Beltway, because the Beltway is totally detached. The Washington Beltway is totally, that is truly Versailles on the Potomac.
It's interesting because I'm seeing people agree with you on Twitter. Tim Sloan says this, or Tim Sloan, excuse me, Tim. If Americans are now relying on the government to create jobs as opposed to the free market system, the American dream is over. Doug?
Well, it is over. And you look at the polls, 80% of young people, and indeed Americans, are saying that it is over and that the lives of our young people will be more difficult than their parents.
But we can't accept that. So what can be done?
Doug, I don't think it's over. I think it's harder to achieve, which John, is the American dream dying. I'll give you that.
Hope is the key currency in our society. And bottom line, for most people, hope is gone.
Look, the primary cardinal tenet of our civic religion, our civitas, is that you give your children better than you had.
Right.
The American people know that's not true. I've often said, if you kill that, there will still be a United States, but there won't be an America. Somebody's going to step up and speak to this. Somebody's going to get up and say, this is an outrage. These guys the men and women in Washington, feathering their nests, taking care of themselves while the country declines.
Suffers, Pat.
While the country goes into a slow motion decline, is not acceptable, and somebody's going to speak to this.
And the candidate who's going to say it is probably going to have to come from outside the establishment of the two parties.
The polling that we previously looked at has shown that 46% of Americans identify themselves as independent. That doesn't mean they're Tea Party, doesn't mean they're Libertarian. They're just not Democrat,
it's really
not Republican.
big. The real majority, it's about, I'm telling you, it's almost 2/3 of the American people are basically alienated, nonpartisan, and looking for something outside.
All right. Someone who calls themselves the wise one on Twitter. I like that. Says, I believe Republican governors are interested in creating jobs, and their state's employment data confirms this. You saw Scott Walker talking about this. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they are more in tune with their populace than the people on Capitol Hill are. I agree with that. And I think you usually consider the states the laboratories of new policies. Maybe out of these states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, maybe an idea or a man or woman will emerge. Let's be hopeful about that.
All right, let's talk about Benghazi now. And these comments from the National Advisor Susan Rice on NBC, she was on Meet the Press today, that information turned out in some respect not to be 100% correct, that were in her talking points. Can we watch that and then we'll get some response?
That information turned out in some respects not to be 100% correct. But the notion that somehow I or anybody else in the administration misled the American people is patently false. And I think that that's been amply demonstrated.
So what she's talking about is she went out there on multiple networks, gave these talking points, and you're shaking your head. I want you to see John McCain's response, but first I'll get yours here at the table.
Well, my response is a couple things. Number one, as we've said before, had the Republicans done a proper investigation to counter what we just saw and prove that they knowingly said things that were false, change those talking points that she spoke of, we would really be getting somewhere, right? And we have, let me just say it, we have 180 members of the House Republican Conference have called for a select committee to finally get to the bottom of Benghazi. They need to get together tomorrow after this. And they need to tell Boehner, Cantor, and McCarthy, you got 1 day to appoint the committee. And if you will not do it, we're throwing all of you out of the leadership.
Okay.
What are they there for if they can't get done what they want?
As we go to a commercial break, because we're going to pick up the conversation after this, let's watch Senator John McCain responding somewhat like John did, shaking his head. You didn't see John laughing. Watch.
I'm almost speechless because it's patently obvious, first of all, that Susan Rice had no reason to be on the program. She had no involvement in it. Second of all, she read talking points that we are now beginning to believe came from the White House, which were absolutely false.
Pat, your arms are up in the air. Why?
Well, because this is the greatest lie of my lifetime. It is, all she needed to lose was the word, it's inoperative, to quote Ron Ziegler in the Nixon White House. That statement is now inoperative. By the way, David Gregory didn't follow up, but here's the point. And they didn't because it's NBC and it's Comcast, and that's another corruption. But only Fox has fought this issue and brought it out. But that was an entire lie. The Tooth Fairy didn't deliver these talking points. They were written, and they were a lie. They knew it was a lie when they did it. That's why she can't be Secretary of State. And the fact, and I agree with John, if the Republican 180 members weren't frauds themselves, they would put the demand you set on their leaders. The American people want the truth and deserve it. And what we got today was a big lie.
Let's put the numbers on the screen, how many Americans want it. The number has changed a little bit since 2013, but not much. 66% of Americans are saying they still want answers in this. Doug, you have the last word before we go to break.
This is not something that is in the day-to-day mainstream media every day. but 2/3 of the American people agree with Pat and John that this is an outrage.
Do you think they know why they want this?
Because 4 Americans died on the 11th anniversary of 9/11, and you know what, Harris? We've gotten no justice, no answers, no results. It's not the way this country works.
And Doug, the public is smart. They can smell BS when they're getting it from their government, and this one, we've never been told the truth.
What is outrageous to me is not only the Republican behavior, but that of Doug and our own party, that no one cares enough about the country to speak out on what was, as I said, a lie, the failure, what was done to the families of these 4 dead, the lack of, as Doug said, any justice being done, but that this could be perpetrated in America. And the reason is because the Main Street media, led by the ghost of Bob Woodward and others, basically have decided we're in the tank for this. And there are people on this network who say that too. It doesn't matter. No one cares. That's the difference between what goes on, the corruption in that capital, the moral corruption, and out in the country. And again, someone should speak to it.
Well, I'm not going to try to defend every member of the media, but I can tell you that inside our Fox home, we are asking the tough questions. We're trying to, and there are other journalists who are too. Roger Barnhart writes on Twitter, Benghazi isn't going away. And I pressed in on the issue of why people care, why they say they care, because even if it's not exactly about that night, it is about what you're talking about, getting the answers.
And by the way, Harris, it is not. It is about getting the answers, and it is not about getting any person. Okay, we've just been talking. No mention of the Secretary of State. No mention of the president. We're not here promoting it for a political reason. We're here to get the truth.
The American people deserve this. They deserved it in Watergate. They deserve it in Benghazi. They deserve it when the government lies, when the government misacts. And when it doesn't, we're all headed down the road to hell, frankly.
We're going to key you in on what happened during the commercial. We're back with the political insiders. Let's talk about Ukraine now. John LeBoutillier, Pat Caddell, and Doug Schoen. Here we have an interim government that's going to try to take hold in that country, so we're told they're going to try to have, and there's some of the chaos. I mean, things have quieted down a little bit, but we had one day where 100 protesters died just recently. So this has been a tough revolution, if you will, revolutionary process. The former president, somewhere in eastern Ukraine, we don't know where tonight. That's a live look in Kiev. That square has been pretty active over the last couple of weeks. But the critical point now is what happens? Do the people who align themselves with the West, who want to elect a new government, what happens with them versus the ones who are right next to Russia, the eastern part of the country? What if Russia steps in and says, we want it this way?
Well, already there have been soundings from Crimea, southeastern Ukraine, of Russians.
Which is a Russian area.
It is 60% Russian, inviting the Russians in as they were, quote, invited into Georgia. Bottom line, the spirit in Ukraine, in most of the country, is of people who share our values, even if we have not been particularly present. What will we do? Harris, I think Vladimir Putin is betting that we will do nothing. This is far from over, despite the peace today.
So, but here's the point, Pat. What if Russia decides to put boots on the ground to try to make it what they want it? What will we do?
What I call the theme of this administration's foreign policy, sending the clowns, after watching from the movie and listening to on the skating. Now that the Olympics is over, when Putin moves, because he is trying, look, he's been trying to reimpose, the Russians are, the Eastern European control that they had in the Cold War. Our administration has laid down, when the president said they'll cross the line, there'll be heavy consequences after Syria, Putin and everyone else is laughing. The fact is we will do nothing. We pulled back from supporting the Ukraine, Eastern Europe, joining NATO. All of this history, the country needs to understand why this is important as much as we're focused on domestic politics. This is now the spark point. And when you said the Russians are being invited in, all I can think of is the Sudetenland. The Hitler was invited in to the Sudetenland by the Sudetenland Germans.
Harris, I think everything these guys have said is right, and I'll go a step farther. I think that Putin has taken his measure of our president, and he thinks he can do what he wants. Now, what the president ought to be doing, get on Air Force One, go to Western Europe, have a NATO meeting, get Angela Merkel and all our
with this
leaders,
new government that's forming.
Well, eventually, but we've got to have a united front that's going to be tough against Putin, and he will face serious economic consequences. I'm not saying military, but because I don't think we're going to put troops, even NATO troops, into the Ukraine. But if he does it, it's trying. we said it in our prep session, reimposing the Cold War, where this guy's going to try to re-annex the Ukraine as part of
all
Russia.
of Eastern Europe.
Wow.
Yeah, and that can't be allowed to happen.
So New Hampshire Senator Kelly Ayotte said today, Doug, toughen up, Mr. Obama. I mean, I'm paraphrasing her, but she told him he needs to toughen up.
That's absolutely right. And if we can go beyond Ukraine, Syria has been a disaster. Egypt, who endorsed the military leader for president? Vladimir Putin. North Korea, a report from the UN saying the Chinese are tolerating and facilitating the most corrupt nuclear regime in our world today. And Iran. Harris, we need a president who is aggressive, who stands for American values, and is committed to what the people of Ukraine are showing.
When they start to hold up signs, like our good Matt is doing, we got to get to a commercial real quickly. But let me get this in. Mike Lecitra on Twitter says, Kiev is very scary. Are we looking into the future of America? We are back with the Political Insiders. And I have to say, I don't know who Mike Lecitra is on Twitter, but boy, he has ignited a firestorm here at the table, during the commercial, and on Twitter. So I'll re-ask. Kiev, very scary. Are we looking into the future of America and what's happening in Ukraine? Pat?
Yeah, I want to take, first of all, we have seen in this administration, just to follow up what Doug said, when the Iranian people stood up, we deserted. We were silent. Same thing in Egypt. Same thing.
Or with the Muslim Brotherhood.
I was about to say the only people we support are the Muslim Brotherhood, the clowns that run our foreign policy. But here's the point: what we're seeing in the world in Kiev is people, and I want to go back to something that both Doug and John referred to: American values at work. These people in the rest of the world, young people particularly, are saying we're not putting up with this, and we'll put our lives on it. In this country, a populace equally dissatisfied with its political class and its leadership. We don't have the same overt oppression, but we have a very soft oppression of complacency and corruption. And the American people, what you're seeing there, they need their own outlet for that. But it is a warning. That was a great tweet question because it's coming.
Doug, your thoughts?
Yeah, my sense is that there is a Cold War going on, that the Russians are fighting and we're not. But more particularly, America could see the same sort of division, Harris, that has happened in Ukraine. We haven't had it. We had the Tea Party in 2010. But bottom line, there's so much anger in this country, legitimate anger, that bottom line, and I'm saying that twice because it is fundamental to our existence that we pull together and deal with our common problems.
But the anger, as we've been talking about on the show for several weeks, is now different. It's not Republicans angry at the Democrats and vice versa. It's the public angry at all of government. Right. And that's in Kiev, that was in Cairo, that was in Yemen, in Tunisia. People have had it with
Kiev.
Well, and what I hear you guys saying, too, is that it's not about contagion. It's about having what's going on in your own country and rising up against it. So people who think that it's not original, it's not about that.
Finally, there's a breaking point. In this country, fortunately, it will be through democratic means and not violence. But someone has to offer them that. And we have a system that is repressing any chance.
You can continue the conversation with the Political Insiders on Twitter, FN Insiders, and at Harris Faulkner if you want to talk to us tonight. On the web every Monday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern. You can find them on foxnews.com.